Hello, everyone. Welcome back from the Artifact Center. I hope you had fun looking around in the Artifact Center. I'm so glad you all are here because we have a special conversation between two giants of the housing development world, but somewhat on the opposite sides of the spectrum. Today, we have Julie Gould, a founding staff member of Fannie Mae, moderating a discussion with Hal Bastian, known as the butler of downtown LA and credited with downtown's renaissance and redevelopment. These two have a common ground of loving dogs and big proponents of pet-friendly housing. So I would like to introduce you all to Julie Gould, who will be leading this conversation with Hal. Julie.
Hi.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for being
Hi.
here. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Julie is the principal of J. Gould Consulting, which provides affordable multifamily and single-family housing and community development consulting services. Clients range from nonprofit developers to community development financial institutions. She is also an active volunteer with My Dog is My Home, where she is using her professional photography skills and advocacy expertise to document best practices of organizations that provide shelter and permanent housing for the whole family of the unhoused and their companion animals. Ms. Gould is the former president of Mercy Community Capital and senior vice president of public policy and advocacy at Mercy Housing from 2008 to 2015. Mercy Community Capital is a national affordable housing lender affiliated with Mercy Housing and certified by the U.S. Treasury Department as a community development financial institution. Their $100 million plus loan pool includes diverse investments from religious communities, healthcare organizations, private foundations, and banks. In addition, Ms. Gould led Mercy Housing's advocacy mission by engaging every level of the organization to educate national, state, and local officials on affordable housing from a practitioner's viewpoint. Prior to joining Mercy Housing, Ms. Gould was vice president for community lending at Fannie Mae, responsible for managing the new affordable multifamily financial intermediary business activity with a focus on providing debt and liquidity for affordable housing lenders, CDFIs, and loan consortia. Ms. Gould's prior experience includes budget examiner with the Office of Management and Budget, deputy staff director at the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, and vice president of the Federal Asset Disposition Association. Believe it or not, that's the truncated version of Julie's career accomplishments. We are very lucky to have Julie with us, and there is no one better that I can think of to have this conversation on developing pet-friendly housing and what we can learn from pet-friendly market rate or even luxury housing developments. There's a ton to learn there. So thank you for being with us, Julie, and I will hand things over to you to introduce our wonderful guest speaker, Hal Bastian.
Thank you, Christine, and welcome, Hal. And I have a similarly truncated version, but nonetheless very impressive bio of Hal. He is a 41-year veteran in commercial real estate, who spearheaded the downtown LA Renaissance since 1994. Known as the mayor of downtown, also the butler of downtown, and now I'm going to give him a new title of the dog father of downtown Los Angeles. He's credited with attracting over 100 businesses and facilitating billions in development in this renaissance. So in pioneering downtown's residential resurgence, Hal championed the old bank district's adaptive reuse, creating a dog-friendly community. And that's really the hallmark about what we're going to hear about. He's played a pivotal role in constructing 20,000 plus units of residential units and welcoming thousands of people and dogs into downtown Los Angeles. Today, Hal wears many hats, consultant, real estate broker, fundraiser, tour guide, and video producer. He's also deeply involved in community outreach and fundraising for the Midnight Mission, which serves Skid Row's homeless population. Hal and his loyal companion, Lucky, reside on Spring Street near City Hall in LA. So welcome, Hal.
Thank you, Julie. It's really great to be here with everyone and talk about one of my favorite things in the world to talk about, dogs.
Terrific. Well, just to set a little stage for the conversation, what we want to do is have Hal provide us some perspectives and learnings of how he used dog-friendly housing as a key upscale rental housing marketing strategy to create the revitalized community that is now downtown LA. But we want to provide a window into the opportunities he saw and the lessons learned in his work to understand why unhoused people with pets need to find shelter and permanent supportive housing where they are, and where they are in the context of downtown Los Angeles is Skid Row, which the Midnight Mission serves. So Hal, let's start off with having you create some context for us about how you came up with the idea in the early 90s of a dog-friendly, key, significant, forward marketing strategy for your rental housing leasing.
Well, thanks, Julie. And each of these introductions are kind of daunting because I was given a lot of credit, I'll tell you. And listen, I helped, certainly. And in high school, I was the drum major of the marching band here in Los Angeles and Granada Hills High School. In my year, we won the All-City Championship for band and drill team. And I didn't win that championship. The band and drill team won it, but I led it. And without me, it probably wouldn't have happened. And they didn't like me because we stayed late for practice every day. And similarly, with the downtown renaissance, it has taken a lot of people to make it happen. And I like to say that downtown LA is an overnight wonder that I've been working on since 1994, you know. One of the things that's really, really important to me is the subject of people experiencing homelessness and people who are mentally ill. You know, not all people who are experiencing homelessness are mentally ill and or drug and alcohol addicted, but in downtown LA, I'd say it's about 95%. It's huge. And I've had the privilege of being clean and sober since September 5th of, I should say, February 5th of 2001. So the only difference between me, like talking here, like in my Brooks Brothers suit with the pretty pictures of all of my dogs that I've had in downtown behind me, and somebody that's experiencing homelessness is if I ever choose to drink or use again, which I hope not to. And if anybody on this screen ever has trouble in any of these areas, it's Hal Bastian, and I'm findable all over the internet, so call me. So that's my precursor to this dialogue. And until 1965, the tallest buildings in downtown were 13 stories. We were a low-rise city. In 1924, 100,000 people lived in downtown 100 years ago. After World War II, we suburbanized. In the late 60s, we started building tall buildings, and the small 13-story buildings were vacated and were empty for about 40 years. So in 1999, a new public policy spearheaded by a woman named Carol Schatz, who was the head of Central City Association in the Business Improvement District here downtown, led a move to do adaptive reuse on historical office buildings into residential. And a man named Tom Gilmore, who was an early adopter of this new public policy, bought 3 historic buildings in historic downtown on 4th Street between Spring and Main, and had developed 241 loft style apartments. And I came downtown in 94 to go to work for a small shop in Cushman and Wakefield doing retail leasing. And on leap year day, February 29th, 2001, I got a meeting with Tom because I was really curious about what he was doing. And so I got that meeting with him, and one thing led to another. And he said, well, what are you up to? And I said, well, this is my last day with Cushman and Wakefield. And he says, well, you seem like you're a really good salesman, so why don't you lease my lofts? And I'm like, I've never done a residential real estate deal in my life. And he said, well, you're a pretty good salesman, so I think you should do it. So on March 1, I started that. And the neighborhood where we were on 4th Street between Spring and Main was a very, very tough neighborhood. And there were many people experiencing homelessness in front of our various buildings. And so after I took this gig, I thought to myself, well, now, the early adopters are tough, but I don't know if they're this tough. And I'm not a religious guy, but I'm super duper spiritual. And I had a spiritual experience in which I'll call it God said, be dog friendly. And that's what we did. And I leased 241 units to 350 people with 100 dogs. So guess what happened? Dogs create community because people are outside and they're walking their dogs. And if I'm just walking down the street and I encounter somebody and I just start talking to them, they might go, what is that all about? But if I have a dog, it's just a natural way to talk to one another. And so that's what started happening. And the people that were encamping in front of our buildings were not shooed away. We realized we were kind of entering their community really on these old empty office buildings. But kind of organically, they moved off those streets in front of our buildings because it had gotten very, very busy. And it wasn't necessarily a comfortable place to be. And so that's how the whole idea of dogs and cats, by the way, we had over 100 cats in those 241 units. That's how it came to be. And then I started proselytizing. I started meeting with lots of developers and bankers and investors. And I told everybody how important dogs were to the community. And I said, when you build your thing, you should be dog friendly too. And that's how it all began.
Well, that's just that's fascinating, Hal. And how did that lead you to become involved with the Midnight Mission? And what do you do there now to be of service? And does it involve pets? And how is that working to combine your aspect of being of service to people in downtown LA and this dog-friendly community?
Well, the Midnight Mission was founded in 1914 here in downtown LA and has been serving people that are having hard times since then. And when I was at the old bank district, I was still drinking. And I was also, I did go through a program, but I was a cocaine addict that hadn't used cocaine because I was a really good functioning alcoholic, but not a good functioning cocaine user. And I did something fun. I put it in solution and injected it. So I was a junkie. And I had stopped doing that because I had one too many near-death experiences. And while I was working at the old bank district, and I think I misspoke earlier. I leap year day was the 29th of the year 2000, right? And now we fast forward to February of 2001, and I had leased 70 units of one of our buildings successfully. And I could drink huge amounts of alcohol and show up and be a good leasing agent. And I had leased 64 out of the 114 of our second units. And I had given a date certain for everybody to move in. I took their money, I signed their leases, they're all moving in. And a week before, and this links to the Midnight Mission, a week before the move-ins were supposed to happen, the fire marshal came in and said, nobody's moving in anywhere because there were a lot of physical corrections that needed to be made before we could get a certificate of occupancy. And I was devastated by this because one of the things for a salesperson is we don't only sell or lease a product, we sell us, personally. It's a little egoic, but that's, how it works. And I was so devastated that I wasn't going to be able to fulfill a promise that I took very, very personally. And after 5 years of not using cocaine, I thought it'd be a really, really good idea to go get some cocaine and syringes and shoot up and get out of here, in terms of escaping this pain. And that's what I did. My drug dealer was still there 5 years later. I knew how to buy syringes at a pharmacy, and I did the deed. And and of course, immediately, regretted it. And this was on a Friday when we got this news. And the next day I was scheduled to give a tour to about 50 people in the old bank district. And I knew I couldn't show up because I was loaded. So I was never tardy to school, kindergarten through 12th grade. I'm wound pretty tightly. And so, my best thinking was, if you overdose and die, it's not a suicide, and you don't get shamed because you're dead, and you don't need to show up for the tour. And so that's what I did. And clearly I'm unsuccessful at killing myself. And I called my friend Orlando, who was at the midnight mission, and said, hysterically, and said, I don't know what to do. And he said, well, there's a Cocaine Anonymous meeting here tomorrow, which was February 5th of 2001. And I went to that meeting, and I've been clean and sober ever since. So that's my connection, and my deep connection to that institution. And I should mention too, that Tom Gilmore, who was my boss, called me to say, where was I? Why wasn't I at the tour? And I just told him hysterically that he had hired a junkie and I had relapsed, and he needed to fire me. And he's like, I'm not firing you, and so he did, and I done a good job for him. So that was my moment. It's kind of dramatic, but it's important to tell people this. And I've always been very, very open about my sobriety at a public level. And over the years, a lot of people have come up to me and said they got sober because, I shared, and it gave them a little bit of hope. So that's how I got connected to the Midnight Mission. And so I worked to raise money so they can operate, and I helped get volunteers. And so that's the nexus between me and one of the reasons I'm so interested and honored to be asked to be in this panel is, so many people experiencing homelessness have pets, dogs and cats, and which sometimes is the only love they have, right? And sometimes having a dog or a cat is problematic because they may have a moment of what we call clarity and they want to get sober, but they can't, get into the recovery center with their dog. And you had asked about Midnight Mission. Midnight Mission does accept dogs from time to time, but it's very ad hoc. There's no broad policy on it. And, one of the issues that comes up is the concern, about a dog potentially biting someone, and then the liability for the institution. It just goes on and on and on. So the bottom line is that we need to come up with better ways on a really a nationwide basis to help people, and so their dog and or their cat can go to a safe place, and that they can recover that dog or cat when they're feeling better and have some sobriety under their belt.
So you're thinking you're going to start right there, right in your own backyard.
Well, I wasn't intending on founding a nonprofit doing this, but I think I just backed myself into it, right?
Yeah. Or getting Midnight Mission to become a best practice. Well, let's move into the physical, the design efforts. What did it take in terms of the buildings for you to design both indoors and outdoors pet-friendly buildings that would attract these folks?
Yeah, that's a great question, Julie. And it was a very organic process. So initially in the old bank district, the biggest planning were tree wells, right? Up and down the street, which was basically the only place to go because we didn't have parks, in that neighborhood. And as I was meeting with developers, I encouraged them. I said, listen, you should really think about an off-leash dog area somewhere in your development that you're building, especially new construction. And today there have been buildings that are built that have doggy wash stations and big off-leash dog areas and place for the dogs to do their business without ever going on the street, which is kind of weird because we really want people on the street with their dogs, but not all the time. And so in order to be competitive, these developers really started to had to step up their game. And to give you the idea of the scope of what we're talking about, I mentioned that when I started doing this business of residential in the year 2000, we had 18,000 people living downtown. Now, if you were listening, in 1924, we had 100,000 people, and now we're down to 18,000 people. We're down to about 3,500 residential units in downtown, which was the lowest density in the city of people. And today we have 35,000 residential units, and we've got 92,000 people living here. And to be competitive, all the buildings have had to provide some kind of amenity to dogs. And it does just, I can't say that it creates incredible community too much, because it really, really does.
Well, to get back to the nitty gritty, what about the floors? You know, you would think that the adaptive reuse is not using carpets, but they're using some kind of material, and you pointed that out to me when we were talking last week.
Yeah. So when we started, we had taken these, at the time, 100-year-old buildings, and we had taken off the carpeting and the glue and the tile and the linoleum, and we had gotten it down to pure concrete. And the magic of this session that we're talking about is that Tom and his partner Jerry Peroni decided to seal that concrete with an epoxy finish. So when you go in anywhere and you see those shiny concrete floors, they get that way because there's an epoxy that goes down, which is non-porous. And that's the secret sauce. It's non-porous. And that's when, I had this, idea of, being dog friendly that I channeled and I executed. That's why we were able to do it, because landlords are legitimately concerned. And I had by the way, I had a dog named Buddy, the golden retriever, who's right here. And I knew how hard it was to be a renter. And so that's what we did. But subsequently, other buildings were built that had, carpeting. And a lot of times what they did is they used carpet tiles. So if there was an accident, in either the apartment or the hallway, they didn't have to replace everything, right? They could clean it up. I'm sorry, I have a frog in my throat. Anyway, we found ways to work through that and deal with it. And if you walk there, a lot of times people talk about downtown LA as if it's one place. It's not. It's about 16 different neighborhoods with sub neighborhoods below that. But every single neighborhood of downtown has dogs, being walked right now as we're on this panel, and people are saying hello to one another. And the dogs are saying hi to each other. In fact, often we didn't know each other's names. We only knew our dogs' names. Right.
In my dog photography business, that's the same. I only know the names of the dogs. So, what do you think, though, in terms of pet policies? How are those set? And did you play any role in how they were set?
Yeah. They're ad hoc. Each building had their own set of rules. Some buildings have breed restrictions, which I think are unfair, because in my experience, it's not the breed of the dog that's the problem, it's the person, that is the problem. So every building has different rules. Many buildings would require you to, have insurance, which you should have just anyway if you're a renter, for your possessions and other things, and also liability if somebody falls down inside your home. And so they need to name the building as an additional shirt on a certificate of insurance. That's very, very common in almost every building that I know of. Some buildings charge a pet rent just because the maintenance on the building is higher with a pet in it than otherwise, and and others don't.
And do you, let's say in the building that you're living in now, what is your what are the policies there? And hopefully you're adhering to them with Lucky.
Well, it's interesting, yeah. Well, once I put it up, Buddy, now I got to point out Lucky. So this is Lucky. He's my 13.5-pound dog, and this, after Buddy died, he sent me Scooter's here, and I got Scooter on June 28th of 2008, and And so in answer to your question, though, our building, which is a condominium building, says we get to have up to 2 pets. There's no breed restrictions or anything else, but we do have to make sure that, things are hygienic and we're not, leaving business in the hallways or the elevators or things like that. So it's very non-restrictive, frankly, in our CC&Rs, our covenants, conditions, and restrictions.
Well, so you've told us how this works for the upscale part of downtown LA, and there's a dichotomy of the upscale apartments and then Skid Row. So how would you say we can come to find some common ground so that pets and their people can live together, no matter what their income or where they are?
Well, they are not bifurcated. And so sometimes in new buildings that receive some kind of a government benefit, there's 20% affordable housing in those market rate buildings. And so that's
yes.
but there's also buildings that are 100% affordable and sometimes have supportive services for mental illness and or drug and alcohol addiction. And they too accept dogs into those communities with restrictions. I think the number one area, though, that it's very unclear and there's no guiding public policy whatsoever, is the issue of shelters, temporary housing, where people are, really in bad shape. And there's really no policy to deal with it or how to do it. I mean, sometimes if the choice is, and this would be my choice if I was still drinking and using, if the choice was to go to rehab, I have to risk my dog going to the pound to maybe be euthanized. I'm not going to go into shelter. I'm not going to go into treatment. I'm not going to do anything. And I don't know, the issue of animal control, as it's broadly discussed, we have a lot of dogs being euthanized. And I don't think our dog shelters in the LA City dog shelter really doesn't have capacity to promise to someone not to euthanize their dog. I mean, that's the simple fact of the matter. So I think it's going to be left to the private sector and to nonprofits to really go in there. But this raises a really, really important issue, which is if somebody is suffering so much mental illness or drug addiction that their dog or their cat is suffering, when do we make the decision to remove that dog or cat from the person? And in 1964, Potter Stewart, who was on the U.S. Supreme Court, a case came before him on the issue of obscenity and pornography and what it was. And he said that he couldn't define it, but he knew it when he saw it. And I think that probably needs to be the standard here too, which it's a tough one. But we got to be taking care of the people as well as the animals. And I think that's probably the most difficult thing to be able to discern. And the question is, who's going to be the arbiter? Who is the arbiter? Who is the judge, on whether the animal needs to be taken away? Our perfect way is we could take the animal away, keep it safe, and then work with the person to get better. But one of the things about sobriety is you got to have a desire to get sober in order for any of this stuff to work, and that person may not have that desire. And I don't have the solution to it, but I bet if we all got together and talked about it, we could have not one person making the decision, but maybe 3 people looking at a situation and doing the best thing possible, with always the goal of reuniting that animal with the person that had to relinquish their animal. And that's not easy, because it may take months or a year, and then the dog or a cat has a bond with a new human, and are we going to wrest them away? Anyway, if it were easy, everybody would be doing it, Julie.
Yeah, but I would counter a little bit here and say, well, the human-animal bond is the strongest bond of many bonds I've seen in life, and keeping those two together and having them have the choice. I think the person needs to have the choice about whether or not that animal, what they, if they want to stay together. And if that means that they have to live on the street or live in a tent or whatever, then that's what they're going to do first.
I hear you. So you had me at Julie Gould. It's like in my perfect world, every shelter, every place would take the animal, but we also have to be concerned about the community, right? That you're going into. And there are some dogs that are more aggressive with people than others, and et cetera. But I like the way you're going with this, is it doesn't have to be either or, right? That
Right.
we can actually do something. And maybe there's some public policies that could be enacted that help. There still are, believe it or not, Good Samaritan laws, which say that, if I'm a witness to an accident and somebody's bleeding out and I do my best, but I make a mistake and they still die, that the family can't come after me because they probably would have died without any help anyway. Maybe there could be some other kind of laws that are related to shelters where people are informed, of it, because ultimately it's all about the lawyers. And if there's any lawyers here, I'm sorry, but it's all about lawyers and insurance and liability and everything else. But, I'm the kind of guy, Julie, I spend 5% of my time trying to do very difficult things. And when we did the adaptive reuse ordinance with Tom and Jerry built it, and I was a good leasing guy, almost without exception, 98% of the community said it's never going to work. Nobody's going to want to do that. But guess what? We created a demand that wasn't apparent and didn't exist because we just knew it in our guts. And downtown is for everybody. It's for people who are experiencing homelessness and every income and education level. And we have something interesting going on in downtown LA, and it's occurring in every city in America, is that the demand for our office space is diminished because people are working from home, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And there's not as much demand for these office buildings, especially in the central business district. So in the past, we converted the old buildings into residential, and the future is going to be converting portions of these office buildings to residential of all different income levels, but they're going to be dog and cat friendly, and they're not going to just be like luxury apartments. There can be co-living situations and all kinds of different things. So that's what we're going to do. And people say now that, we can't do that. And I'm just like, nonsense. There's 100 reasons why it's difficult to do it. And I'm always interested in the one way to yes. And, a couple of my favorite sayings that Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And the other thing I like to say is we put men on the moon in July of 1969, or at least a really good sound stage. And we can do things like this too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely something that's solvable, but we have to focus on it and really make sure we get to what I'm calling, and really the name of this panel and discussion is from shelter to permanent housing, that you just can't stop at shelter. And that's really what co-sheltering conference and what Christine and the board of directors and the collaborative have put together, focus on shelters, which you're pointing out is a huge need. And I'm coming from the side of permanent housing, permanent rental, permanent home ownership housing. So there's a solution that goes further than a day pass. You're
Right.
given more than a day pass. You really have a future in front of you.
Well, listen, that is the goal, and permanent and sometimes supportive housing is the goal. But let me tell you, in Los Angeles, to build that kind of housing, from the day you buy the dirt to the day you get your first dollar of income can be 5 to 7 years. 5 to 7 years of people experiencing homelessness on the street because it's so Byzantine, it's so arduous, it's so expensive. There's things called capital stacks, which is like a Jenga game. If you lose one, you lose all of the financing. And so I know that some people in the community think that if you do shelter, you take away the urgency to build housing. I respect that opinion. I just don't agree with it. I think you do all the above. You start with shelter, you give options, and talk about public policy. We need to create the public policy in a way that it's not so difficult to build, especially in our big cities. That's really the solution to, I think, to all of this.
Well, Hal, this has been terrific. We're winding up down to our last 5 minutes here. So how would you summarize what you want this audience to take away from your experience?
Well, I want every person that's hearing me speak to know that solutions are totally doable and possible, that it takes leadership to do that in the community. So that those of you who are inclined toward leadership should be talking to your elected officials about how to come up with public policies that would make it easier for people experiencing homelessness to keep their dogs and cats in a shelter situation. I think in terms of housing, it's always going to be doable, and do something about it. And then, once we have some success stories, right? Then it becomes the best practice for people to do, in other cities. And of course, there's people experiencing homelessness in rural areas as well, but not as much as the big cities. I'd say the big cities are 95% of, of that issue. So believe you can, right? Lead, talk, and then do. There's 3 things in life, Julie: thoughts, words, and actions. Thoughts and words, I got millions of them. Actions, I have a capacity problem.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you, Hal. Good. Well, I hope our listeners have gained some wisdom from Hal's experience, and hope we can build on this to find some common ground and build that continuum between shelter and permanent housing.
Well, great. And, we didn't have a chance for questions and answers here, so I would invite anybody on the screen that is interested in continuing this dialogue. You can look for me on social media under Hal Bastian. You'll find me. You can email me at hal@halbastian.com. And, you talked about the butler metaphor. When I was a little boy, I wanted to be a butler. And the reason I wanted to be a butler is I wanted to live in a big house without having to pay for it. And I wanted to control everything. So I consider downtown my mansion, and I think of myself as somebody whose duty is not only to take care of the real estate, but to take care of the people within it. And I didn't have children in this lifetime, but I'm having a city, and I'm of service and willing to be of service to all people. And thank you for inviting me to be with you today. And I hope you've had a great conference, and we can do it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Julie and Hal. I really think that's a beautiful sentiment to end on, being of service to all people and animals. So thank you for closing out our conference. We are honored that you both could join us and contribute to our understanding of providing homes for people, and that a good quality of life, a vibrant community, a home isn't just about having a place to live. It includes the other beings that you love, like your animals. And it is about the idea and the values, but it's also about the practical things like sealing the concrete floor, right? So thank you both for joining us. I appreciate it, and be well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine.